Fuck around, make my 40 pop.
This episode right here was absolutely amazing. I don't know if the writers heard about last week how there was a bunch of criticism going around about episode 214, but they brought everything this week. Now, I even talked about the staff. I talked about how I didn't necessarily expect the animation to be that good, but there's a lot of people on this episode that worked with a lot of storytelling, a lot of slice of life, and they basically did that to damn near perfection. But the first thing that we do have to get to has to be Kashin Koji. Kashin Koji actually did escape alive, and this scene right here is a little bit different from what we did interpret from the Boruto manga. What it looked like at first in the Boruto manga was that Kashin Koji and the frog basically dipped out before Isshiki Otsutsuki could actually do anything, but in this particular scene it seemed like the actual toad tried to bite Isshiki Otsutsuki. Now obviously that right there didn't work, and I think this right here kind of coincides with Isshiki Otsutsuki's overall idea and ideals in this episode and in the upcoming episodes. He could have definitely killed Kashin Koji right there on the spot. He just didn't care. His main objective as of right now is to get to Kawaki, and after that, then Isshiki Otsutsuki can engage in his recreational activities, but as of right now, he's 100% dead set on actually acquiring Kawaki and implanting him with the Karma Seal. And I don't know if it's just me, but when Kashin Koji was on the floor laying down like that, he looked absolutely identical to Jiraiya. I understand that they're clones at this particular point, but this right here looked completely different. Now, another big thing from this episode has to be the differences from the Boruto manga and the Boruto anime. I think one of the biggest differences that we did see is the fact that in the Boruto manga, they explicitly asked everybody not to engage with Isshiki Otsutsuki unless they are Naruto or Sasuke, but there was a complete difference in this episode. Now in the preview I did talk about how Konohamaru was going to be making contact with Isshiki Otsutsuki. I expressed my dismay, I expressed my confusion, and I expressed my complete and utter disappointment in the Boruto writers, but Konohamaru, to my surprise, showed up in this episode. Now obviously he didn't necessarily damage Isshiki Otsutsuki or nothing, but among the jonin that were there, Konohamaru looked the best, and I think this right here was definitely a very big criticism about this whole entire arc and the whole entire series at this particular point. The lack of utilization of the side characters. Now I do want to point out, obviously they didn't necessarily make any major moves, mainly because it is Isshiki Otsutsuki. We didn't even actually see the fight, but just talking realistic terms, an Otsutsuki member pulls up to the Hidden Leaf Village. Most likely there's still going to be some other ninjas that actually try to fight Isshiki Otsutsuki. Not only that, in the actual Boruto manga, there were some fodder characters that actually tried to attack Isshiki Otsutsuki. That wasn't the case here. We had Rock Lee, we had the Goat Tenten, we had Choji, we had just a bunch of jonins that we do know, which obviously made that scene a lot more enjoyable, even though they didn't necessarily do anything against Isshiki Otsutsuki. But we know that everything is not perfect. I don't know, I would have absolutely loved if Rock Lee would have probably went into 8 gates or even the 7th gate, and we would have seen some sort of exchange between Isshiki Otsutsuki and Rock Lee. I personally believe that 8 gates Rock Lee wouldn't be able to do anything against Isshiki Otsutsuki. I think that power and speed barrier has been well surpassed over 16 years ago in this timeline of Boruto. Boruto and Sasuke, 17 years old, would probably destroy 8 gates, my guy, but that's besides the point. Isshiki Otsutsuki doesn't even really care about the other characters. Now obviously Isshiki Otsutsuki did actually say that he wanted to kill some people, man, because if he did that, they would probably hand over Kawaki to Isshiki Otsutsuki. So he was actually looking to kill Konohamaru and the rest of the jonin, but he wasn't 100% trying. I think one of the biggest parts that we could possibly look to has to be the scene where he did use Daikokuten. In this particular scene, he put his stone column right above the face of Konohamaru and let gravity take it down to Konohamaru. One thing that we do know about Isshiki Otsutsuki is that his Daikokuten could possibly pop up wherever he wants to. We seen this in the scene with Kashin Koji, when Kashin Koji had Isshiki Otsutsuki in a corner in the last episode where he was in between a Rasengan and a wall of fire. His Daikokuten immediately made contact with Kashin Koji, but in this particular situation he was kind of trying to see exactly what Konohamaru was trying to do, and obviously he wasn't 100% trying. I'm not necessarily saying this just for this episode. This is going to be a theme with Naruto and Sasuke as well. He's not going to be going 100% trying to absolutely knock their heads off. His main objective is still going to be trying to find Kawaki and implanting him with the Karma Seal. But speaking of Daikokuten, it was actually explained in this episode. He basically says that he stores things that he shrinks in a different dimension where time doesn't flow. And this right here was absolutely iconic in the Boruto manga. It didn't necessarily have the same flair in the Boruto anime, but I can't necessarily complain too much. In the Boruto anime in this episode, he basically put on a whole new suit of clothing and also brought out a glass of wine and drank it right above Kashin Koji as he's literally fighting for his life. And speaking of iconic moments, they also animated the scene where Isshiki Otsutsuki bent down to figure out exactly what Kashin Koji was also saying. I'm super happy that they didn't necessarily cut these things out. But continuing on with the timeline of this review, Naruto and Isshiki Otsutsuki did actually go up against each other in this particular episode. And I said this in the preview and I said this in the spoilers that the fight scene wasn't necessarily going to be that crazy, which is why I kind of understood why they didn't necessarily have hard hitters on this particular episode except Ichiro Uno. The short fight scene that we did see proves that Isshiki Otsutsuki is on a completely different level. I mean, even Jigen, we understand, was on a completely different level, but Naruto seemed like he stood absolutely no chance. But before we get into exactly what happened in that particular fight, I do want to talk about what Naruto did before that fight. I just want to say condolences to the people who actually did believe that Naruto does not have Sage of Six Paths mode anymore. This right here essentially proves it. I mean, respectfully, it's time to put that narrative to bed. Naruto still has Sage of Six Paths mode. But regardless, into the actual fight, I mean, it was absolutely insane. Isshiki Otsutsuki was pretty much playing with Naruto and still absolutely demolishing Naruto. Naruto and Sasuke, more likely than not, just them two alone, probably has no chance against Isshiki Otsutsuki. But in the midst of Naruto actually getting completely destroyed, Sasuke did actually come in and save Naruto. One thing that we could always count on Sasuke for is the absolute epic entrances. This man has the best entrances by far. And the crazy part about this scene right here is that he didn't even have his Sharingan activated. Like, this right here was all casual to Sasuke. But along with Sasuke came Boruto, and one of the biggest storylines during this actual manga chapter when it was in the Boruto manga was if Boruto was actually willing to die for the Hidden Leaf Village. Now the Boruto manga, they kind of portrayed it a little bit different. In the anime, they didn't necessarily put that much emphasis on this. Now in the Boruto manga, similar to what we did kind of here in this particular episode, but it just wasn't necessarily emphasized that much. Boruto at first hesitated, which is what he did in the Boruto anime as well, but he later clarified that his fear isn't necessarily dying for the Hidden Leaf Village. His fear is actually getting his body taken over by Momoshiki Otsutsuki. Now, even though they did cover that, they didn't necessarily make it that clear and that concise. But even though they didn't, you could definitely see the maturity in Boruto in this episode. It's literally amazing how people are comparing Boruto from this particular episode to Boruto in episode 65, obviously because he had headband on, but it's honestly just a clear difference. I even seen a couple of days ago, people actually compared Boruto's eyes from this episode and Boruto's eyes from the first couple of episodes, how Boruto looks completely different. Seems like Boruto is completely more stressed out. I personally believe that Boruto was just a little bit more matured. Boruto had an absolute huge part in this episode as well. Boruto was actually the catalyst to actually take Isshiki Otsutsuki out of the Hidden Leaf Village. Now this right here on the surface, specifically in the Boruto manga, this right here was also portrayed a little bit different. In the Boruto manga, Isshiki Otsutsuki was literally on a rampage. He didn't necessarily see the joins of Konohamaru, Choji, Rock Lee, Lady Tenten, a bunch of characters like that. He seen some regular characters, and after he disposed of those regular characters, he then went on to actually destroy the actual village. That didn't happen right here. So Boruto taking Isshiki out of the Hidden Leaf Village in the Boruto manga was a lot more important, man, because Isshiki had already set his sights on the Hidden Leaf Village. But nonetheless, Boruto's role in this episode was still absolutely critical, man, because we understand if Naruto and Sasuke were to fight Isshiki Otsutsuki in the Hidden Leaf Village, the village would have most likely been destroyed by not only Isshiki Otsutsuki's doing, but also Naruto and Sasuke's doing. And I think another big storyline has to be Boruto's Karma Seal progression. Never mind the fact that Boruto's using all these abilities off of instinct, like he's never really trained or tried to do some of these abilities before, he's just doing it out of the thin air, but also the fact that Boruto is now getting closer and closer to 100% completion with his Karma Seal. And that right there, as I said before, it could be a good thing and it could be a bad thing. It could possibly be a good thing, man, because Boruto is getting a lot stronger with the Karma Seal, and it's also a bad thing, man, because he's getting closer and closer to Momoshiki actually taking over his body. There was a bunch of good things that happened in this episode, and I can't necessarily cover them all in this particular video right here, so I'm probably going to be talking a lot about it in the upcoming days. Let me know what you guys think about this episode in the comment section below. I personally believe it was definitely a very good episode. I think the Boruto writers definitely heard the criticism from last week and wanted to step it up in this week's episode. But it's been your boy Baara B, and we out.
It's a knife.